What do we need to understand about how society will be different if super intelligent robotics is just around the corner?
Do you want an uplifting answer or like a...
Give me the honest answer.
It would be difficult for humans to kind of adjust to that. This could go, one or two ways mainly. I think, given that humans are, driven mostly by greed, it'll be quite a disruptive phase where things could be much more bleaker and darker. The problem with, I think, AGI is, what does that mean? I think we're conflating intelligence with sort of human empathy, wisdom, lived experience, self-awareness, and all that sort of stuff, right? Just 15 years ago, robotic engineers wouldn't talk to AI folks.
Dr. Damith has seen it, lived it, and questioned it. And today, he shares a perspective leaders can't afford to ignore.
Robotics is too important to be left alone with the roboticists or the engineers. My claim to fame, I think, is that we did the first visit of all study in robotics in Sri Lanka in the 1980s. Robotics is not rocket science. It's much harder. The people who kind of move in and then, promise unreasonable possibilities within short time frames, and then investors invest in them, and they realize that this is not going to happen, I think that'll kill the whole industry.
Dr. Damith, thank you for making time to have this conversation in the middle of a busy week, busy day. I appreciate you making the time to have this conversation. When I had a look at your background and experience, there's a few things I want to unpack. But if I can start at what's probably topical now, there's lots of conversation about super intelligent AI and the intersection of robotics and how that'll be our reality really soon. If that is true, what do we need to understand about how society will be different if super intelligent robotics is just around the corner?
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Do you want to I've been thinking about this question, right? And do you want a sort of uplifting answer or like a sort of on the negative kind of...
Give me the honest answer.
Because I think there's hardly one single direction that we could infer from what's happening right now. To your question, I think it really depends on us as humans, how we, orientate society. Like when the Industrial Revolution happened, right? That was relatively gradual. I mean, it was still disruptive, but gradual. I thought, what's going to happen with AI and robotics? It would have a fairly quick, change of pace. And it would be difficult for humans to kind of adjust to that. So this could go, one or two ways mainly. I think one in a sort of utopian view, I think it'll be great. We'll have all kind of labor replaced by machines, and there's like a productive society, and the underlying infrastructure, the policies, and the politics, all that sort of has adjusted to a mechanism that supports human flourishing, right? So you're not really doing hard labor anymore, but you'll be supported through, I don't know whether it's a UBI, universal basic income, or something like that supports humans to kind of flourish. So that's kind of my optimistic view.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, given that humans are driven mostly by greed, that's probably not going to be the case. And I think it'll be quite a disruptive phase where things could be much more bleaker and darker. So I don't know which would happen, but that's kind of my honest answer to that one.
Looking at the positive view, because there's a lot of the negative out there, can we go back to you when you were 12 years old? You comfortable, I'm going to say, in Kandy in Sri Lanka, exploring robotics. Where did you find the love for robotics? Because I don't think it was very common even back then.
I think the inspiration actually from a TV series called Buck Rogers.
Right.
I think it was in the 60s that I came out first. And it was shown in Sri Lankan TV, so, amazingly. I think we were fairly, progressive. We had some really good programming back then. And I was just hooked. And I really enjoyed that. They had this robot called Tricky in it. And, it was a kind of semi-humanoid, it was cute. very crude design. And I want to kind of recreate that. That was kind of the interest. But it was driven by the fact that, and I think all good engineers are the same quality. You are lazy. Like you want to find a shortcut to do stuff, right? So when I was a kid, like waking up, especially really early in the morning, because back in the day, you need to get to the bus to go to school at just like, 1.5 hours, worth of traveling. So you wake up around 5 in the morning and then you need to get dressed and all that. And I thought, like, if I can automate all that, like I don't know how to do any of those chores, it would be cool. So it was kind of the need to kind of find shortcuts in life to live a comfortable life that drove me to robotics, I think. And I don't know how actually I even knew the term robot. I think it's through that, the science fiction series. So that was one of the first instances where I actually created a robot. So I enjoyed building electronic circuits and stuff like that from a very young age. But all that sort of, I think, culminated in that one robot.
Because I'm very curious about how their passion started, and I've heard people getting into coding and programming at an early age and even gaming. Not too many people in robotics. How did you build someone in something, and who did you tell that you built this thing? Is it your parents? Is it your friends? Like, who's giving you the feedback loop?
Well, my parents are pretty, like, they raised us as free range kids. Like, I mean, my dad was, I think, fairly radical too for that time. He was a fairly hands off, but he was subtly hinting at things. So I'll share because my life could have been completely different. I love theater. That was my passion when I was a really kid. Like I really loved arts, and my music teacher unfortunately said, like, "Son, you can't sing." So that part was out. Like I couldn't sing. So what was left was actually like theater, and I did a lot of drama when I was a kid. So one of the leading actors at the time had this idea of creating like a performing arts institution in Sri Lanka. This is in the early 80s, right? And he went around the country looking for talent, and he came to our school, and I was picked up. I had to do some performances and things like that, and I was the only kid picked from my school. And on a weekend, he convened all these kids that were selected, and one of the requirements of setting up the institution was that those kids will be removed from the schools, and they'll be in this like unique performing art center. So obviously, my dad didn't think that's a good idea, but he didn't want to kind of disappoint me. Right. So he said, like, in particular, said, like, no, that's not going to happen. You need to go to school and, learn. But in a subtle way, this is why I said, like, he was a bit, I think ahead of his time. He got me one of the earliest computers. It's a Commodore 16. It's one of the first, kind of computers that came out in the 80s. I don't think many people have had access to something like that. So I had access to that. So that kind of what got me prompted to like looking at programming and coding. So I really I just, I went crazy with it. I don't know why, but always I had this physical element that I needed to connect to this programming. So I never really was purely interested just programming. And you need to understand that this is when internet wasn't a thing. There's no resources, right? And especially in Kandy, there was only one book in one library, and that had the instructions for programming the Commodore 16. So I had to kind of do a lot of experimentation. And one of the things I wanted to do was to program a system. So this is kind of like the smart home system when people haven't really thought about it. And so I want to program this computer. So when the morning happens, my curtains in my bedroom would open automatically. So that's kind of my idea that it would be like part of a smart home system. So I was experimenting how I could interface to the computer. I figured out that if I connect to like a LDR, like a light dependent resistor, through the game sport, like a game port. You can detect the variation in current, and I can use that to turn on a motor. Right? But then I didn't know a lot about different voltage systems and things like that, obviously, at the time. So when I kind of put the whole thing, the microcomputer actually blew. I think one of the chips actually got busted. And I didn't tell my dad because it was quite expensive. I said, like, the computer's not working.
Something's wrong.
Something's wrong. It's not working. So it took a while actually for it to get repaired because it was really expensive. So all these little things, like I've had a bit of a tangent, but it's for whatever reason I really enjoy these kinds of hardware interfaces, and the fact that you can kind of automate these things through programming. Right? It's not like you building one single system. You can create multiple systems and reconfigure them to do different things. That fascinated me. So its embodiment is the robotics, and I think the arts bit kind of connect to that as well. Like when you're watching Buck Rogers and how it sort of embodies these electromechanical systems, I found that whole narrative very interesting. This is more sort of hindsight. I'm thinking how I must have thought about it, but while I was in it, like I was just kind of like flow, right? Like doing these things, I just enjoyed it really. It was like a sort of self fulfilling loop. Like I just enjoy doing it, so I would explore stuff, learn myself, and the fact that it's hard to find those things, it made it even more compelling. So I would just experiment with things. So that loop, I think, kept me going. That's how I got interested in robotics.
That's fascinating because I'm thinking, and I grew up in Sri Lanka, and I'm thinking kids our age would be playing cricket with their friends, running around doing other stuff, versus this kind of thinking was going to take you a lot of time. Well, tell me about your childhood. Did you do sports in school? Was there a lot of just time in robotics, time in coding, time in research? Because you also knew that there's only one library in Kandy that had this book, and you probably know which library that is also. Yeah. What other passions did you have? And the reason I ask that is a lot of the times brilliant minds, and I'll go to even a recent example of, we look at somebody that's big on YouTube like Mr. Beast. If you ask him, he spent his whole childhood just researching YouTube. Didn't care about friends, didn't care about what anybody was doing, till he became the best. Now people go, oh, but he just has one thing. It got labeled the weird kid a lot. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a passion if you guide it the right way. Was that a passion? Did you fight through stuff to bring this passion alive?
Yeah, I think actually it's like I never really thought about it that way. It was just it was natural. Like I don't know why I did it. Like I'm glad that I found it. Like from a very young age, that was the thing. So obviously, I wasn't much of a fan. Like for a Sri Lankan, I really don't watch cricket. So that's a good thing. That's a lot of the time. That's like a conversation killer. Like so who's the cricket team now? Like I have no idea. Yeah, from a very young age, I had those two passions. So I think the cool thing is like I had this interest in art in one side. Like I had that kind of awareness of being more open to ideas, new ideas, different ways of looking at things, but also the engineering, being precise and articulate and kind of researching things and going into like little rabbit holes. So they were like the two sort of main passions that drove me. I mean, I obviously played cricket and LA.
It's good, yeah.
As a child, I enjoyed it, but a lot of the time it was just myself tinkering with stuff. I mean, I still remember that, like the feeling that you get. I think the best way to describe it is the flow. Yeah. I think that's kind of the term that people use now. It kind of mesmerizing. Like you get into like you're building a circuit or doing a bit of coding or whatever. I don't know what the time or how the time passes. And like I said, my parents weren't really worried. Like they were never pushing us to go in any particular direction. So there's like my passion, like my thing that I enjoyed, and that's it. Like so until very late in my life, I mean that was the thing that I was just doing.
Tell me about an early achievement in the field of robotics or your creative little experiments that in your mind said, hey, I'm onto something. I can do something with this.
I don't think I had any achievements. I mean, honestly, I was actually again thinking recently, and this is influenced particularly by my collaborations with Australian performance artist Tilak, and he called himself a failure. Like he says quite eloquent to that. He built a career on failures, and I reflected on my life. Like I don't think I have any particular achievements, but I had like like intellectually stimulating or enjoyable excursions into ideas. That's kind of what I think I've done, and I'll still do. Um, but one of the things that in sort of reflecting now after like 40 years, when we built that robot and I say this anecdote, so it was I mean, it was not obviously an autonomous system, right? So it had a mechanism where the robot can go back and forth, so you can kind of remote control where it goes. And then I built a like audio amplifier and put it in its head. And there was a mic, and one of my mates, he's in Australia, so we hid him behind a box, and people can come and ask questions from the robot, right? You had to pay 25 cents. So
Nothing's free.
Nothing's free. Like, I mean, this was the state of the art back in the day, right? Like, you can actually literally talk to a robot. So you can ask a question, but you had to pay 25 cents. So, kids, this is I was like 12 years old. So we had it actually at a public exhibition. So we had a pretty good run. So people would come and ask questions, and my man just hadn't been like he could hear what the questions like. He was sort of good in a robotic answer, like whatever fun thing. And it was fun until our teachers found out that we've been scamming people. Like, so we had to shut down the whole the enterprise of it. But when I reflect now, like a lot of the research we do in human robot interaction is like that actually, and we have a technical term for it. It's called Wizard of Oz studies. So Wizard of Oz being the story Wizard of Oz was actually controlled by somebody sitting behind the curtains, right? So a lot of the robotics, and this is also the fact that we can talk about more later, that robotics is still not a mature technology. So a lot of the studies we do in understanding how robots and humans work is controlled by a surrogate or a controller sitting behind a little curtain, controlling parts of the robot that can't be automated. Like the AI is not still ready for that prime time. So my claim to fame, I think, is that we did the first Wizard of Oz study in robotics in Sri Lanka in the 1980s. And also we probably were the first to kind of commercialize the robotic service, human-robot interaction. So those two things, I think, probably are my biggest claims to contribution.
And I'm reflecting back to 2025, early 2025. The Neo X1, which is the robot that was put into houses, used the cameras in the eyes to see, and somebody controlled it.
Yeah.
It was a big problem. Like, oh, it's not autonomous. But you did that 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But if you go to Universal Studios in Singapore today, and you stand in front of Transformers and ask it questions, or when it starts insulting you, it's somebody behind the curtain actually voicing that out. What made you think ahead of the time? And I know that's not the thinking at that time, but retrospectively, when you look back, and I know you classified it as, I've done a few things, don't know if they're successes or failures, but when you look back, are you proud of some of the people that you hung out with to do these things?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in all of these, I think that's the only success. Like, actually, I had the privilege of working with some amazing people, and I still do, even with the lab at the moment. I mean, that's kind of my proudest achievement. Like, we put together a group of people that really work well together and are very complementing in their skill sets. So, I mean, if anything, I think the one thing I probably have done again and again is to kind of bring these kind of disparate teams together to work on cool ideas. So obviously my talent is just, I think, bringing people in together and allowing them the space to do stuff they like, but also providing some sort of scaffolding and a framework so that we can build together. So I think that's probably the thing I might have contributed to both the engineering and I think the art practices as well.
Thinking of your passion for performing arts and your master skill of bringing people together to do things, who are some of your favorite people to collaborate with?
I mean, without doubt, Stelak, the artist, and I consider himself as a mentor, a friend, and a colleague. And he's been there in some of the darkest times of my life. There have been pretty terrible points in life, especially in my professional life, that I felt like I was kind of I don't belong in a particular context. So he's been an absolute inspiration. I mean, and I said, like, it's unfortunate that in Australia we have especially the tall poppy syndrome, and Stelak is one of the absolute top performing artists in the world. In one of his monographs, Ebadi Press actually said Stelak is the most celebrated performance artist in the world. Wired said he's the legendary performing arts artist in the world. But if you ask most Australians, they don't know. It really disappoints me, and especially Australian galleries, museums, I think have not honored his work to the extent that we paid homage to, especially for American artists and European artists. We have some of the best people in that kind of avant-garde artist space. In Australia, we haven't really honored them. So having had the opportunity, the privilege to meet him, now it's almost coming to 20 years now. That really changed my life. Like, that kind of opened up a lot of things that we did afterwards in robotics, especially in the robotic art space. So he's kind of my absolute, person to have met, and that changed my life. And he continues to inspire, and he's been one of those people that kind of see to the future, like what we did with the tricky robot in the 80s. He's been doing that sort of thing since the 60s in Australia. Like, he's been about 20 years ahead of time in all the things, and I was privileged to kind of work with him on a number of projects that foresaw a lot of the technologies that emerged, and we were kind of building prototypes of those, some 10, 15 years ago. So I think that having that connection and being able to work with him and to continue to work, I think is one of the highlights.
What's the coolest thing you've done together?
I mean, we're still doing. So the coolest thing is actually it's a installation piece called the articulated head. So it's the industrial robot arm with a monitor mounted on its end effector, and on the screen there was an animated version of the artist's face, and people can actually come to this system and ask questions, and it moved around. It was a sort of emergent behavioral system, so nothing was pre-programmed. So when you kind of face the robot, and if you approach the robot nicely, gently, it'll come close to you, slowly, and like a little dog or whatever. And if you are a bit more aggressive, you will retract, and all that emerged. So these are some of the ideas that we were testing 15, 20 years ago, when people haven't really even thought about these kinds of stuff. And that was purely Stelak's kind of imagination. So for him, he was mostly thinking about a kinetic art piece, so it's a sort of kind of mechanical system that sort of works on a routine. But I was just coming out of my PhD in robot navigation, and some of the kind of probabilistic models that we were experimenting in that space. I thought I can apply it to this idea. So I think that's the other thing that I've been doing a lot, like bringing ideas from different disciplines and merging them to create new ideas. So this art installation, it was kind of a precursor to what we think now as embodied intelligence systems. And even however crude it was, like the technology back in the day, people still believe that as a live agent. Like people thought there's agency behind it. And that was one of the most revealing things about that piece of work. Like, that illuminates how humans perceive technologies and when they increasingly become human-like, or the kind of the intelligence or the behavior mimics human qualities in how people react to that. So it was really great insight. And that piece has evolved since then. Like, we are actually now on the third iteration of that project, embedding some of the new LLMs and new technologies, obviously. But even then, it showed what the reality that you were asking earlier could be, and it was really provocative.
If you had the magic wand in your hand now to change a few things, how would you best celebrate pioneering creators like Stalak, who you just mentioned, so that they'll get the right levels of attention?
I think it's also cultural. I think different places have, like, as Stalak himself once said that one of his regrets is actually not moving to US, because he would have been much more celebrated, and his work would have been widely acknowledged, like Mariana Abramovich or people like that, because he's a contemporary of hers as well. So I think it's probably hard to it's hard to kind of imagine what would happen if it's in a different context, right? Like, then people might not appreciate it in the same way. So I wouldn't change anything, but I think what we could probably do is to like these conversations, illuminate what this work has been, and to appreciate it a bit more, I guess.
You touched on a sense of isolation. In my research and reading, I have seen a lot of creative minds, brilliant thinkers experiencing this, and it's not an uncommon feeling. Why, in your opinion, is that so? And what does that feeling actually feel like?
That's a good question, actually. I do, find, I find large gatherings actually confronting. I don't enjoy it. Unless you're performing or in a lecture theater, I'm in my element. I enjoy that because that's kind of more a performative thing, right? But if you're in a large gathering, I tend to avoid them. I now can avoid it anyway. Like, I'm in a position that I can say no to things. But when I was a bit younger, like, you need to, to build your networks and things like that, you need to do things. So I find smaller gatherings, conversations like this, much more energy giving. So I generally enjoy isolation. I have a few really good friends, and I find them really valuable. But I don't have large circles. It's hard for me to maintain them. Especially, I think we being a Sri Lankan, we thrive on those connections and companionship. But I find it a bit challenging at times. And that's kind of what I think, what happens is I got these ideas that's just churning in your head, and they take time, right? So, and I find that more energy, building and joyful. So you're probably true, like, there's, people who are driven by ideas, probably find themselves in isolation, and that could be problematic at times, right? Like, you don't have the same sort of, I think, network of support that you probably need. So
for somebody who experiences that feeling or sense of isolation from time to time, how did you overcome that, or how did your experience now teach you to navigate that feeling?
I mean, it's sometimes it's hard. Like it's honestly, you. There have been times when I've really felt depressed and like there's nobody. Like you could be amongst friends and we family, like we still feel like really depressing and difficult. I had been, I have gone through multiple iterations of those things, but interestingly, I think now, I think I have built better coping mechanisms, and I also now find actually having those quiet times more joyful. Like I was telling, like I was actually wandering around Sydney the other day, just myself. So I find I have, I think, built the skills to be with myself and not feel like isolated. So I find relative joy in that now. But it took it took a whole lifetime of building that. I think that muscle to appreciate. Okay, you don't need to have that many people around you, or you don't need to constantly have noise kind of surrounding you to kind of keep yourself alive, or stimulants to kind of drive you. But I think like any other skill or a skill set, we kind of gotta work at it. I think so. Mindfully, how to practice understanding. Okay, you're feeling a bit isolated, lonely, but that's fine.
I find it fascinating because I've spoken to ex-military people on the podcast who also are photographers, like Scott Lego, who is in Canberra. I've spoken to young 21-year-olds who've taken their parents' business and running restaurants like Kita in Canberra. Fantastic establishments. I've spoken to a Paralympic athlete, Jesse Ungles, who lives in Canberra, who won the 4x400 Olympic gold medal, who say the same thing, that I could be surrounded by a group of people, but I feel lonely because we're not sharing that same trajectory of thought. And that conversation isn't giving me energy. It's a conversation. And being there is taking away energy. And you said that you're in a position now to be able to say no to some of those things and be mindful about what gives you energy. Is there anything we can do to learn that skill a little faster? And I'm speaking for my own self. That took me 40 years to learn that. And I'm like, if I could have done that a few more years before. Is there anything in your experience that tells you, hey, try these one or two things that might help you get there a little earlier?
I've been reflecting about the face of change, and like people are in a hurry now, right? Like I want to be enlightened tomorrow, whatever, millionaire, whatever your goals are, right? I think you would agree as well, I guess, that these things I think come with maturity, and part of the learning process is those difficult moments, dark moments, and sheer isolation and depression, all that. I think part of it, and obviously the systems are there now that are much more helpful and less stigma associated with that sort of things. And I think people appreciate people are different, and we have different kinds of expectations, and right. So one of the things I think for me has been the fact that you sometimes compare with others again, and increasingly now with filters applied, it's really hard to see what's real and what's not, right? So you see like, that guy is having the perfect life, I'm just really isolated, not so I think we're kind of putting a bit of a varnish, and that makes it harder to kind of, I think, learn it. I can say this, but it might sound cliched, but it doesn't really matter what other people do. And the only race, if you may, is with you, right? Like, it's ultimately nobody really cares about what you do. Like, everyone's kind of interested in themselves, right? Like, they don't really judging you per se, like, you're not doing well. No one's making those kinds of judgment calls. They're really all worried about themselves. So why would you worry about what other people think about it, compared to where they are, with respect to your own sort of life standing. And that's because that's kind of what drives you to do things and to feel isolated and depressed, right? So if you kind of accept that, I am who I am. I'm enjoying my life to the best. I don't need to compare with anybody, and I can give myself time to just be with myself, right? I don't need 1,000 followers. Right? If I have like one or two good friends, and that's becoming harder. I think that's especially for I think Gen Zers is finding these meaningful friendships. Like I said, then I have only a handful of friends, but I can just pick up the phone after 10 years and I can call them and we can pick up where we left off, and there's no judgment. We can talk. So I know that, and I have a very loving family, so I know that I can kind of fall back on that. So that's kind of all you need, I think. Everything else is peripheral, and it's driven by the need to kind of look better than everybody else or to match for them. But having said that, I think it comes with experience and realization. So some people realize it earlier, and some people don't. So. But I think that's just having that self reflection. That you're not competing with anybody. No one's judging you. You are judging yourself. So let go.
And that's a powerful thought, because I want to now transcend that into LLMs and how we're teaching our robots to behave in certain ways. Social media and comparison culture can be an echo chamber from time to time. How do you program, or how do we broadly program robotics which is driven by LLMs to not be echo chambers, to reflect the best of society, not all of our weaknesses? Are there safeguards that you think of inherently when you're thinking, I'm going to give this robot some intelligence?
So I probably need to kind of, I think, take a couple of steps back. So I'm not an AI expert. I'm a roboticist, and this might be surprising to a lot of your audience that I think people conflate robotics and AI. Just 15 years ago, robotic engineers wouldn't talk to AI folks. Like that's a science. This is a funny insider joke. Like AI is a kind of black box. At best, a science, not even engineering, and we are true engineers. So just as an example, Paradox University back in Sri Lanka didn't have a software engineering department, and there was a raging debate: should we have it in the engineering faculty, because it wasn't a considered engineering discipline. So that's why we had computer science, which is in the science faculty, but not a engineering, software engineering or computer engineering in the engineering faculty until quite recently. Actually, I wanted to do software engineering, but they didn't have that option, even in the 2000s. So you could see how things have changed. So I'm a mechanical engineer at heart, and my programming skills are atrocious from a software engineering perspective. I can code, but not in the kind of the elegant way that software engineers would do it. So until very recently, even just combining mechanical engineering and electrical or electronic engineering into a single discipline was contested. People don't know what mechatronics is 15 years ago. Even now, I think it's still problematic. One of the engineering bodies, Engineers Australia, didn't acknowledge that until quite recently. So robotics is actually quite a multidisciplinary area, and people approach it from different angles. So people who come from mechanical engineering build mechatronic systems that are kind of autonomous and can do autonomous activities. People from computer science also build systems, and the difference, I think, we are much more hardware centric, and people in the kind of computer science, computer engineering, they're more software centric. So until the whole, the kind of the large language models and deep learning kind of evolved in the last 10 odd years, they were quite separate. People in the engineering side we were building like mechatronic systems for specific tasks. So it could be like an automated guided vehicle, robot manipulators, which has been there for like 51 years now. And on the other side, there were more simulated kind of problems that looking at swarm intelligence and power planning, things like that. So there's a area that's like really hardware centric, developing new control algorithms and things like that. And then there is where I did my PhD is called probabilistic robotics. This is how do you integrate the uncertainties in the world into the models. So all these are what are called model based robotics. So you inherently know what the algorithm should be doing, and we can kind of test that. So you've got a model of the world, or like a smaller version of the world that it's going to operate in, right? So these are all in a way kind of deterministic systems. So you know exactly what, that's why we want to model the uncertain. So that's why we have the probabilistic systems. And then people in the AI, what we call black box systems, right? So they're all data-driven systems. So these are basically using data to understand how a system should behave, and then the algorithm itself learns the model, right? So we call it model-based systems, and then these data-driven systems. The beauty of the model-based systems is like when it's going to fail or why it failed. With these data-driven systems, you don't know why it failed most of the time. Or if it's in an edge case, you don't really know how it's going to behave. And that's kind of the problem with AI. And that's why they're called black box systems. So what is happening now, I think, especially with LLMs, one of the problems, bringing in robots to kind of science fiction type contexts, right, is robots inherently don't have a good awareness of the context in it, which it's operating in. So all the robots that have been successful so far are actually in very limited settings, in restrained, constrained environments, and you kind of either map out the environment or you precisely program the robot how it moves. And all the factory automation, there's no
thinking behind it.
There's no like like any kind of uncertainty in that motion. Like exactly how it's going to happen.
So the robot's not going to get emotionally angry and say, "I'm not going to perform action A, B, and C."
No.
Okay.
Yeah. That's and if it did something weird, we know why it did it. Like it's not like it's nothing to do with the emotions. It's like either one of the components failed or the model wasn't properly designed or whatever. We know exactly why it didn't. So increasingly, what's happening now is that we can use LLMs and then by extension vision language models and all the other kind of emergent models that we call multimodal systems that not only take text but computer vision and other kind of sense modalities into computation to understand the environment a bit better. So now I can ask what's that? And that's a camera, right? So I don't have to pre-program that to say that's a camera. The LLM will tell me, that looks like a camera, right? So then I can say to the robot, go and pick that up, camera. So now you have the context and the controllers to go and pick the camera, which was kind of inferred by the LLM. So what is happening now, I think we're trying to figure out best ways to integrate AI and the pre-AI control systems to come together to do much more a higher level thinking. Right. So at the moment where we are, people are really like large scale kind of importing these large language models into robotics, and that's why you're seeing these impressive things. So they're still doing kind of same things that we did for the last 50 years, but with non-model versions of those systems. And they are now data-driven. So that's a bit of a long-winded kind of answer to kind of set the scene for what you asked. So right now, what we are doing is really trying to figure out how we can integrate LLMs into robotics. from that, I think we got a bunch of steps before we can have truly fully autonomous human aware systems like the one that I built 40 years ago.
Without your friend behind.
Correct, exactly. So I think some of the problems have already kind of expressed themselves in social media, in the way LLMs have been used in more mundane tasks, right? So we know that there are data biases that is problematic, cultural biases, and there are edge cases we don't know how it would perform, right? So we already kind of seen some of the red flags with AI systems. So I think with robotics, I think we have a bit of time still to at least hopefully iron some of those social problems before they creep into robotics. Because the robotics, I mean, this is the thing that people don't really appreciate. They take time.
You told me about the science of robotics. You told me about the black box, which is the AI-driven codes or algorithms and all of those things. How surprised have you as an experienced robotics person been around some of the recent narratives of whether it's AGI or whether it's we're all going to get replaced by something? The deep scientist in you, how surprised have you been?
I mean, we all will be replaced one day anyway. So I think that's a good way to ground yourself. Like, nothing's permanent, right? Everything changes. So from that, I think you can kind of scale back and ask reasonable questions about it. To begin with, I personally was surprised by the recent developments in AI. Like, I didn't expect that much of change development within like a span of 20 years. So I mean, it's really hard for humans to think, non-linearly, right? Like, and that's kind of a fact. We think mostly in linear terms. So when we were building the first articulated hit robot, it was really hard to get, voice recognition to work. Text to speech was horrible. The deep. I mean, I think it was kind of on a semi AI winter at the time. So people have lost interest in, neural networks and things like that. So, and that's why we actually explored the idea from a behavioral based system using probabilistic models. And I didn't imagine that in the next 15 years we will be in this situation where we'll have these amazing algorithms, right? So the phase of development and the work that has been done is just amazing. So it's impressive, right? So you need to kind of acknowledge that. Like, you need to take a moment to appreciate that. It's brilliant. But I was just playing with the latest Gemini 3 image creation tools, and like, I gave a prompt to recreate something that I done, and with just like 5 or 6 prompts, it just came up with something superb, and I thought that is amazing. So definitely things have improved significantly. We're kind of really in an amazing time. So I think you need to acknowledge that first. But then the question is, like, from that, how do you interpolate or extrapolate the next progress, right? What that might look like. Because we have a lot of rhetoric around AGI, machines replacing humans, and all kinds of nonsense. So I think it's partly, I mean, obviously there's a hype cycle, and we kind of at the peak hype, I think. So there's a lot of things that are and probably will not come to fruition, but there are things that will be not the same again. So AGI, to answer that particular question, this is just my personal view, obviously, and I need to qualify that I'm not an expert in machine learning, but I kind of understand the mathematics and the algorithms behind them. We obviously use them on a regular basis, but I have not researched in that area. So I just want to qualify with it. We're looking at what I think it's partly a problem of definition as well. Like, well, what does that mean to have AGI? Because back in the day, Turing test was the kind of the impossible hurdle to jump, right? And even for me, I thought like that's not going to happen in my lifetime. Like when we were working with the articulate head, like you can fool people. Like with the articulate head, people actually believe there's agency. So it's relatively easy to fool large numbers of people. Having robot machines having intelligence or kind of behaving like humans. So now I think for all manner and purposes, the original kind of Turing test is no longer really useful marker of intelligence for the systems that we're developing. So we're kind of moving the bar, right? So the problem with I think AGI is what does that mean? And I think what people understand and kind of in a sort of generic sense from a sort of public perspective, what I think understanding as AGI is the kind of like human-like behavior, right? It can infer things, understand context, and make appropriate decisions. But if you think about humans, I think we're conflating intelligence with sort of human empathy, wisdom, lived experience, self-awareness, and all that sort of stuff, right? So if you take it in that sense, there are people who are not really smart and, but they still contribute to society in amazing ways. And like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, right? Like when we say intelligent, I think what we think the rocket scientist, but then applied it to any ordinary human. So from a computational kind of point of view, I think what scientists probably would call AGI is this narrow definition of intelligence where it's mostly computational intelligence, and that'll go on to be better and better, and obviously would be better than humans, because no one single human can possess all the knowledge that humanity created. And this is what I find with working in the interdisciplinary space is what is important, because a lot of the new ideas actually come from connecting dots between different disciplines, and that's really increasingly hard for a human to do, because there's so many things going on, you can't keep track of all that. So intelligent systems, LLMs, all these things can actually have all that information, so they can make interesting connections between different information points. So I think that kind of super intelligence obviously will surpass human intelligence, right? But that's a very computational view of the world, and that's not what I think we understand when we kind of hear AGI. I think we are thinking like how these systems could behave like humans.
We watched the Terminator too many times.
Exactly, right? Like they are, self-aware, making decisions and preserving themselves, or all kinds of these things. I don't think that there's a path from LLMs and these algorithms to that particular idea of AGI. So I don't think we'll see that. But we'll see increasingly sophisticated systems, computational systems. So that's kind of my personal opinion about it. Like, so what we say is, I think it probably is actually already there, because for all parent purposes, I think probably in the next year or so, like we'll reach the limit of available data that you can use to train these models. Right? There's no new knowledge. Like all the humanity's knowledge for the last millennia, 2 millennia, or whatever, 5 millennia, is now actually in the training data sets. So that'll be the peak. All right. And if we then let machines do stuff, I don't think we'll be creative anymore. You'll actually go down. Like you'll actually become, artificial dumb generation as it progresses. So I think we'll hit a peak like that, and I think already sort of scientists are kind of warning about this, eventuality that that they reach the peak intelligence, and what's going to happen is that you'll be feeding LLM generated stuff back to it, and that actually degrades the quality of those models. So it actually will degrade potentially. So I think we'll hit a peak, and the realization will set in, and that would be the AGI in that sense. But the kind of human level I think that's kind of where robotics will be interesting. So if I could quote something that Stellar mentions, so he says, I think in his monograph, to be intelligent agent, you have to be both embodied and embedded. So what we're seeing so far is neither of those things. So robotics is the path to both embodiment and being embedded. So embodiment means that you actually have to be physically embodied in a physical system, like a humanoid or whatever form, and then they need to be interacting with the environment, so embedded in the environment. Now that is, I think, what would be the ultimate test to see if these systems can actually survive and thrive and do amazing things. We are not there yet, and I don't think we even know how to get there yet. People are exploring, and kind of right now, I think they are most linear explorations from, we got an LLM, just chuck it in and see. So all the amazing, kickboxing and kung fu fighting robots, what they're literally doing is just getting a model trained on these data sets and checking into an existing robotic system, and they just replay what they learn in simulation, right? Because you got to this kind of situation where we have really done well in improving hardware systems, sensate systems, and now you got the machine learning part. So you can kind of bring all these things together to create much more fluid demonstrations. So the next, I think, couple of decades would be interesting, and which will tell whether we'll get to the type of AGI we are thinking.
The next one I wanted to chat with you is an area that you have expertise in, but I don't know if a lot of people do. People who passion in robotics don't actually understand very well how it takes to have an AI, have a robotics startup, how to source funding, the difficulty of it, and what you are promising your investors. Can you shed some light on that?
That's probably like a longer conversation. I mean, that's so there's a lot to unpack in that particular question, and I might just maybe answer one part of it, because I think otherwise I would be doing a disservice to the community that are building some amazing stuff, right? So one of the things I think would hit people trying to commercialize robotics is the realization that they don't bloody work 90% of the time, and it's such a disconnect, and this is something I think really important to understand. So this is called the Moravec Paradox. So Hans Moravec is actually a MIT, Carnegie Mellon professor who done a lot of the early work in computer vision. And he made this observation that anything that's easy for us is actually hard for robots. And anything that's hard for us is relatively easy for robots. Right? And people conflate these two things. Like whenever you see a human doing, picking up a cup, drinking, it all comes naturally for us. And you immediately imagine that a robot should be able to do this. And it's so hard. It's, it's extremely hard to do that in a meaningful way and repeatedly. And maybe this is where we could wrap up, with the example you mentioned, the Neo robot that just, Exxon launched recently. And it's all just, human controlling and trying to learn by doing things, right? Just to do that, so the perception of that is that, okay, there's a human-like robot, it should be able to do all that stuff, right? And I was watching one of the first news items about it, and then this reporter went there and did it, and then she's kind of utterly disappointed that even with a remote controller, it took 10 minutes for it to pick up the dishes or something.
Yeah, from the dishwasher. Yeah. Yes.
And so she's like, "Oh, this is a bit embarrassing." And that's the reality of robotics. So anytime you try to commercialize something, this reality gap hits you. And the problem here is that to progress, you need funding and you need to sell a promise, right? And most of the time, investors actually don't understand these complexities. So if you are realistic, and that's what we did with our company, we said, like, because this is 15 years ago, right? Pre-LLMs or deep neural networks. And we said, like, we can do X, Y, Z. In most investors' mind, that was just, you're not competent. Like, we already seen, all this cool stuff. Why can't you do all that? Like, you're telling me I need to invest a few $1 million so that the robot can move from X to Y and that's it. And I said, yeah, that's all you can do. So this reality gap is problematic, and most investors, funding bodies don't understand it, and that's a problem. And that's why I think even more harder for robotics to evolve at the same rate as AI, because the expectation gap is huge, and the kind of capital outlay at the beginning is quite large. And to get to that, most people will have to promise something that you can't deliver. Unfortunately, I've seen that, in fact, in Australia as well. I'm really supporting and rooting for all the robotic startups in Australia, but I think you need to do it in a way that it doesn't ruin it for everybody, because the people who kind of move in and then promise unreasonable possibilities within short time frames, and then investors invest in them, and they realize that this is not going to happen, I think that will kill the whole industry.
And the investor will never invest in
the other. I mean, I've seen that this repeatedly happening in my 15 years of trying to commercialize stuff. So I think you need to understand. So remember Moravec Paradox. And if you're an investor, I think you need to get on your team people who are actually experts who build robots and been in that space for a long time, so they understand the complexities of it. And if you are a startup founder, and you feel like you should be able to do this, how hard this could be, you need to really think about it. And I think that's where real expertise would help, and the experience would help. So you need to really surround with yourself, people, engineers, experts who actually have been in that space and done and tried to do some interesting work for a long time.
Dr. Damith, thank you for sharing your experience, your intelligence, but your realistic worldview also. It gives me some hope. I will find some time for us to come back again for another conversation on the funding side of it, but also what's the next iteration, the next phase. If I can close with one question. What is that one thing about robotics that the world should know that no one has asked you about yet?
That's a very interesting question. I think probably the question is how hard it is.
And the reason I'm asking you is because it's not been a research study for you only. It's not been a commercial enterprise for you only. You had passion for it at 12. What is that one thing that we need to know?
I think it takes time. It's really, you can't hurry it, because it's a real. I like this quote. I think it was Ken Goldberg from the UC Berkeley who said it. Robotics is not rocket science. It's much harder. So it's really hard, and no one really asked that question. And like I said, that's why as I recently said, like the three laws of robotics, right? So Isaac Asimov in his foundation series said, there's these three laws that will prevent robot uprising, and I called these three other quotes from leading researchers the three other laws of robotics. So Hans Moravec is one, which is anything hard for humans is easy for robots, and vice versa. So then Ken Goldberg's notion that robotics is not rocket science, it's much harder. And I forgot the other person who made the other observation. Robotics is too important to be left alone with the roboticists or the engineers. So it like I said, I think at the beginning of our conversation, that robotics is a truly interdisciplinary area. So there's no one expert. I mean, obviously, engineering is important and it dominates it, but it requires, artists' input, the computer science people, cognitive science people, psychologists, all kinds of different people, ethicists, and moralists, philosophers, be involved in that design and development. So it's really, really a bloody hard problem. So I think the real question is how hard it is. I think it's quite hard.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your wonderful work. And I wish you all the best as you make progress on your journey, whether it's through robotics or through whatever brings you fulfillment. When we can, let's find some time to catch up again.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. A huge thank you to the wonderful team at Doma Hotels for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you are looking for 5-star accommodation, wonderful event spaces, and carefully curated dining destinations, the Doma Hotels offers all of that for you.